we don't have much time left on this earth. It's one of those things where we just need to recognize that God has given us a gift. Each day is a gift. We don't know the day or the hour the Son of God will come. We don't know the day or the hour that our lives will be up. So it is time for us to take up what God has given us and to stand firm in it, We gotta share the good news. There are people in your life right now who you will meet who will be changed because you came and shared the good news with them. We can't wait for a better day. We can't wait for a better time. It's not like we're waiting. I just want to point out there's a really important difference here. It's not that we're waiting for God's time. We can't be waiting for the future to come at a better time with that kind of expectation of, oh, it's not a good time right now. Things are just not lined up to, it just could be better. Well, I don't know if I feel awkward right now, or, that's what I'm talking about. We can't have this attitude of, ooh, I'll wait for a better time. No. If God is calling us into something now, we need to step out and we need to step into what He's calling us into. We can't wait for a better time to come when God is calling us to step in now. One of the really cool things that we heard at the David and Stephanie conference that just happened this weekend. David and Stephanie Herzog came from America and they preached in Japan. And one of the cool things they're talking about was that sometimes the testimonies we have, the things God is doing in our lives, the prophecies that God is speaking over us, they aren't things we're waiting for, like, with this expectation of like, oh God, in the future, may it come, but we're praying for it. It's like there are things God is calling us into now that we get to step into now. We don't have to wait for them to be coming in the future. We can step into them. Like one of the testimonies they shared was that there was this conference that was aligned. They had words of knowledge that were spoken over them about potentially about preaching in a conference, renting out this one big convention center and preaching there like every 3 months or so. And he was praying on this word, and he had the prophetic word. And then eventually they went back, and the time came, and he went and talked to the person at the convention center. And they had this connection, and the person actually shared with them, he's like, the last time that you came into town, I remember you, but I wasn't able to go, and I really feel like I missed the opportunity God gave me to show up at your conference, and so I promised myself that the next time I would take the opportunity, so you can come, we'll pay, we got it covered for you. You can even do 3 times a month if you want to, every 3 months if you want to. And he was shocked because it was like the steps were already in place for this thing to take place. This prophecy that was prophesied, things were already in place for it to happen, but he was waiting for it to happen. But the thing is, if he had stepped into it even a year ago, it would have been ready. So in that encouragement, I found that really encouraging, because it's like, how many areas are there in our own lives where we look at the situation, we look at a prophetic word, we look at something we're dreaming about for the future, but we feel like it's something for the future, we're praying for it, we don't see it yet. Are there things in our life that God is walking us into now that we can access? We don't have to wait on them. We don't have to wait for them to be like a distant future thing, but it's like God is calling us into steps right now that we can take and walk into those things. Walk in those prophetic words. Are we stirring those prophetic words? Are we leaving them on the shelf? When I was younger, I would go to these Christian conferences, I'd receive prophetic words, and I'd feel like good about it, but I eventually was starting to receive and have this desire for the prophetic words rather than the prophesying, the Spirit was prophesying, which was Jesus. Jesus is the one who's speaking into my life. Jesus is the one speaking into your life. We can't be so focused on the words, on the prophetic words, that we miss the God who's reaching into our hearts, who's trying to point us to Him. That was my story. I don't know if that's your story. But I started to look for the prophetic words rather than God, And I don't know if that's your story. I don't know how you are with prophetic words. I had to change my mindset. I had to change my view, how I was looking at God. We can look for the same thing in healings, other miracles, pastors. We can look at them and say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to see healings. I want to see these things. I want to see people saved. But it's like, what are we looking for? Are we looking for results we want to see? Are we looking for fruit? Are we looking for long-term things? I think that's really important. We recognize we need to have a long-term goal mindset. Sometimes I can talk about myself a lot because I can relate to what I'm saying because it's me. But it's like we can look at things from a long-term perspective or a short-term perspective. My mom always says. My mom says this sometimes. She says, every choice you make takes you closer to one thing and further away from another thing. And it's like we don't realize it sometimes, but it's true. Everything we do literally takes us in one of two directions. We can either go one way or the other way, and every choice takes us closer to one of those two directions. So, it's important to recognize that the choices we have, are crucial. We can be following God, or we can be following what things that happen immediately. Sometimes we have prayer requests, sometimes we have things we're praying about, and we're just expecting them to happen instantaneously. And when they don't happen instantaneously, it's like disappointing, because we're like, gosh, I prayed about this thing, and it's not happening. Like, why not? Where's God? Where's God at? And it's like, God is not a popcorn God. God's not the kind of thing where you can just pray for, and suddenly, poof, it's there. Not to say there aren't times where God answers really instantly, and we're amazed and shocked and like so excited to see God, intervene and move in such a speedy way. But it's like, we don't need to. We shouldn't have this mindset of because things don't happen instantaneously, that doesn't mean God is not moving. He moves. Sometimes we don't see him, and that's one of the reasons why it's really important for us to actually listen to God and see where he's moving in our lives, so we don't accidentally miss what God is doing because we're expecting an instant answer. We need to be looking for long-term things. We need to look for what he's doing right now, what he's doing ahead of us. Instead of looking for, oh my gosh, someone just got saved, hallelujah, woo, but it's like, what does the follow-up look like? What does the discipleship look like? What does the long-term thing look like? We can't just be people looking for an instant result without looking for the steps to take place to move into the next thing. When you have someone get saved, what is the next steps that happens with that? What are the next things that you do? You connect with them, you follow up with them. You share the good news, they get saved, and it's like that's a crucial moment for that person where now they're like, oh my gosh, Jesus, whoa, I decided to turn my life to him. I want to know Jesus now. I dedicate my life, but now what? Where do I go? Hopefully we invite them to church. Hopefully we get them involved with a program or with some sort of Bible study or some sort of discipleship, or maybe we meet up with them the next week so they don't lose that. They don't just get saved and then they're just wandering around like, okay, now what happened? I think that's really important that we're intentional. I think it's really important that we also focus on relationships. I used to have very much of an attitude and kind of a problem where I would basically just want to talk at people. Talk. I was excited. I was just interested. I was excited the fact that someone actually wanted to hear what I had to say, because for a lot of years in my life, I felt like what I was saying was not important or was seen as not important by people around me. I felt like that people ignored me and people weren't interested in me. And so when I got on the mission field last year, I was really excited to talk at people. I was excited. I would talk at people so much that eventually they'd just be like, yeah, oh man, I wish you'd shut up, and I didn't know that. I didn't recognize that. And my pastor, she really helped me to see the importance of not talking at people, not talking so much that people stop listening to you, but listening to them, developing relationship, and also stop talking, in that sort of sense of like, it's like, we need to listen to God, see what he's doing, and actually have a back and forth relationship with people. We need to be intentional. We need to be looking for fruit. We need to be seeing what God is doing, So it's like, many things to talk about, but be encouraged that God is going to bring results in your life. God is moving on your behalf. God is doing things we don't see, we can't understand. He is changing things behind the scenes. There are things that are lining up that weren't lined up before that he's lined up now. Certain things that are perfectly in place. Maybe we just don't see it yet, Let's take the opportunity to look at our lives, look at what God is doing in us, and say, God, where are you in the middle of all of this, We can be really scared, we can be really unsure, but are we listening to God, Are we looking for what he's doing in this? Because I think it's really important. We get our head, clear on get on our shoulders and start to ask ourselves, God, what are you doing, Enough about what I want. What do you want, We can look at a lot of stuff that we want. We want so many things. But is it the heart of God? And I want to clarify this. Not to say that we can have an attitude where it's, is it God's will about something like healing people? Does God want people to die? No, God does not want people to die. So we also can't have an attitude where we're like, if it's not the will of God, it won't happen. And like, I shouldn't do anything because it's not the will of God. Well, that's not right either. We can't have an attitude of just like, if it's the will of God, things will happen the way they happen. God is calling us to partner with Him. He wants us to pray. He wants us to seek His will. He wants us to seek Him and to pray into the things He's wanting to do. So if we have people that are sick, God is calling us to pray for them. God is calling us to cast out demons. God is calling us into deliverance, to war with them so they can get set free. God is calling us to pray the things He's calling us to pray, to seek Him so we can pray effectively. This is what God is calling us into. We need to hear His word, know what He's saying, and to partner with Him in those things. So let's be encouraged. Let's walk together. Let's see what God is doing. Let's be excited. Let's be funny. Let's be funky. We don't have to be like these stone cold, rigid Christians where we're not doing a whole lot. Let's see what God has for us. Be weird. Be yourself. You don't need to worry about how people perceive you. You don't need to worry about looking like a complete weirdo. Not to say we shouldn't, try to, be good looking people. We need to represent Christ, but at the same time, we can't be so focused on looking good, acting the right way, being so sophisticated looking that we miss what God is doing. God has made you unique on purpose. God has given you a destiny. God has made you special. There's so many cool things about you. What if the weirdness that you have is what draws people to Christ because they recognize that they can be free too? If God made you the way you are, don't you think that's okay? Now, I want to clarify, not to say that every sinful nature about you is purposeful. It's not. God has given us the opportunity to stand firm, stand up for what He stand up for the truth, stand up for what's right, resist sin, and cling to God. But the attributes about yourself, like maybe your weirdness, maybe your social awkwardness or your quirkiness, those aren't necessarily bad things about you. We need to see where God has made us. Some people, they're really bold, they're really strong, and other people can maybe look at them and be like, that's kind of like, I don't know about you. You're kind of rough and abrasive. But it's like, maybe that person, God did not call them to be that soft, gentle nature. Maybe God called them to be a breaker. Maybe God called them to break strongholds and to say things clear and upright. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Just because they have a different way God made them doesn't mean they're not made correctly. Just because you're not soft doesn't mean God didn't make you to break things down and to be bold. You're right. You're just the right person that God needs. God made you for such a time as this. Maybe you speak softly and you have a soft voice and a soft spirit. And you speak with such kindness, but you look at evangelists, you look at these bold people that stand up and debate people, and you're like, man, I wish I had that boldness. Not to say that we can't pray for boldness and ask God to strengthen us in that, but we shouldn't have this attitude of like, oh man, I wish I had what they had. If I had what they had, I'd be so much cooler, I'd be so much better, I'd serve God better. It's like, no. What do you, gotta ask God, how have you made me to be? And how do you want me to grow into who you want me to be, God? Who are you calling me to be? Who do you need me to be, God? Look at your identity. We got to know our identity in Christ. So we're not feeling incomplete. We're not feeling like we need to shift everything about ourselves to become a perfect person so we can be used by God. If we need to be perfect to be used by God, none of us would be used by God because none of us are perfect. We're never going to get there. Don't try. We want to, once we die, we'll be perfect. But we're never going to reach perfection as in we're looking for in this side of heaven, But God is calling us to grow. We should never stop growing. We should never be in a place where we feel like we've reached the end goal. We're done, woo, we're done. Oh, I can relax now. No, we're not relaxing. We are not sitting back and saying we're perfect. We are called to always be seeking God, to always be growing, and to always be looking for ways to get deeper with Him. So, always be looking for ways to get deeper with Him, It doesn't need to be super complex. Oh, Jesus, It's like, what are you showing me to do, God? How do you need me to grow? What's on your mind, So, be encouraged. Let's be encouraged together. Let's see what God has for us. So, I'll catch you next time. Bye!